refresher is on the law of sines. So what is the law of sines? Well, let's start with a triangle. If we have a triangle that is not necessarily a right triangle, what the law of sines tells us is that we can solve the triangle, which means we can find all of the angles and all of the sides given some information. So how can we do that even though it's not a right angle and trig functions specifically deal with right triangles? So let's start by labeling this triangle A, B, and C. And of course, we want to label the sides as well. So I'm going to label the opposite side, the lowercase version of the letter. So opposite of the capital B is lowercase b, capital C is lowercase c, and so on. So you'll notice that this triangle has no right angles. So how do we talk about sine, cosine, and tangent? How do we talk about trig functions if there are no right angles? Well, let's create a right angle. So if we draw a line straight down from C to the base, we can create a right angle here. And let's label that H1 for the height. So now we can talk about trig ratios. So if I wanted to define sine of A, what would that equal? We've got to remember our trig ratios. So just as a reminder, I'm going to write TOA up here. And remember opposite over hypotenuse. So the opposite is H1 because we're talking about this angle from A. And the hypotenuse in this case is B. And if I wanted to solve for B instead of sine A, or if I wanted to solve for H1, I could easily do that by performing some simple algebraic operations. So let's talk about what sine B might be, because we're actually using the same opposite here. Sine B equals H1 as well, over, and this time the hypotenuse is A. So you'll notice we have two equations. We have lots of unknowns, but specifically these two equations have something in common. They both have an H1. So if we solve for H1, then we can set the two different equations equal to each other. So if I multiply both sides by B on this side, I get H1 equals B sine A. And on this side, if I multiply both sides by A, I get H1 equals A sine B. Since these both equal H1, I can set these two things equal to each other. So I end up getting B sine A equals A sine B. Now, this is the law of sines, but we like to put it in a ratio form. So I am going to divide both sides by AB. And if I do that, you'll notice that the B's cancel out and the A's cancel out. So I end up with sine A over A equals sine B over B. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, but what about C? That's a good question. So what I'm going to do, because this H1 kind of bisects C into two different angles, I want to rotate let's not do that. I want to rotate this triangle. So what if I copy this triangle? I'm going to move over here a little bit, and I'm going to paste it. Okay, there's a few things that I don't need in here, so I'm going to erase them. So let's erase that H1. Don't need that. Don't want to do that. Erase the B, right? So, and I also want to erase this middle line here. So you might be asking yourself, okay, well, now I have the exact same triangle, but what if I rotated this triangle around just a turn? And let's see if I can move it a little bit. There we go. And now you'll see where the angles are. And let's try to have both of them in the view. Let me zoom out just a tad. Where B is now up here, A is now over here, and here we have C. So now I can draw a straight line from B to the base to create another height. So all I did was rotate a triangle in order to get C down here so that I can find a trig function for C. Let's call this H sub 2. So now I can talk about C and A in terms of the sine function. So if this is C, A is here, C is here, and B is here. Sine A equals H2 over C. Sine C equals H2 over A. Solve for H2 on both sides. And then set these two equations equal to each other. So I get C sine A equals A sine C. Divide both sides by AC. The A's cancel out, the C's cancel out, and I end up getting sine A over A equals sine B over B. And if we put all of this stuff together, if sine A over A equals, ooh, I'm at C. C. So if I put all of this stuff together, I get sine A over A equals sine B over B equals sine C over C. And this is my law of sines. Let's try